So the introduction I have is a little bit long, so just bear with me. Support specialist at Kids Cancer Care. We're very excited to have you on today. I would like to introduce our speaker for the evening, John Laing. John is a registered psychologist who has worked in the education system for the past 9 years. Prior to this, John provided family-based mental assessment and intervention to children, adolescents, and parents experiencing a variety of challenges, including mental illness, addictions, and domestic violences, as a counselor with a local community-based mental health organization. Through his experience, John fully understands and appreciates the importance of team-based collaborative approach when working with students and parents in support of their own goals. John understands the complexity of education system, today's classroom, as well as the difficulties teachers often face in supporting the learners in their classrooms. He understands the difficulties parents often face in navigating education systems and the barriers that they face. John believes it is vital to student success to engage all key stakeholders in a student's life. Through this perspective and respect John has for individual autonomy, John is well known for his ability to engage and build rapport with difficult teens and children, as well as parents and teachers who often have a variety of different perspectives and experiences. John's expertise include helping students and families navigate the complexities of ADHD and learning difficulties, anxiety and depression, understanding your child's learning profile, relationship building, and social skills development. He has an understanding of how ADHD impacts executive functioning and how it relates to managing everyday tasks and meeting daily expectations at home and at school, including social, emotional, behavioral, and academic demands. I would like to welcome John Laing.
Thank you, Sherry. Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure here to do this and be able to speak and have it recorded. I think that probably was the longest introduction of myself I've heard, which is good. It eats up some minutes that I have to talk. So thank you very much. I just first want to say it's a pleasure and an honor to come and to speak to everyone involved at Kids Cancer Center, and it's an honor to be here. And my thoughts go out to all of you as a parent. I can't imagine what some of you are going through. So my heart goes out to you, my thoughts go out to you, and it's an absolute honor to provide any information that I can that might be helpful to some of you. So thank you very much. Can you see that, Sherry?
It is starting. There we go. And we can see it.
You can see it? Yeah. Is it the entire screen?
No, I can see your sidebar for your PowerPoint. So if you click on slideshow and from the beginning, then we'll see the full screen.
Just normally like I would. Okay.
There you go.
That better? Okay. Okay. So I work in private practice now, so I do a lot of consultation with schools, both on the public side as well as the private side of things, and do a lot of assessments, for ADHD, as well as lots of assessment for things like depression and anxiety, some trauma work, as well as family systems work. And for a lot of my practice, I do get families that come in because they're having a difficult time or conflict with their teens, which my day's coming. I have young kids, and my day's coming, when they get into their teen years. But having teenagers is typically conflictual all the time, and that's what makes them teens. But I do a lot of work with family conflict when it comes to teens. I work in Airdrie at Hexagon Psychology, as well as here where I'm at right now with Kaizen Education Services, who they provide learning services and learning coaching for lots of teens and youth who are having some difficulties in school. That's a little bit of where I work. What we're going to talk about a little bit today, and just for just over an hour, probably we'll see how far we get, is we're going to talk about lagging executive functioning skills. So often when I talk, I get asked to talk about ADHD. But whenever you're talking about ADHD, you're actually talking about executive functioning skills. And so this is what this presentation is going to be about. It's going to be focusing on the lagging executive skills that can be impacted by going through cancer treatment, radiation, and chemotherapy. Executive functioning skills can be impacted by anything, by being tired, by being overly stimulated, by having anxiety or worry, or being depressed, or being low mood. It can be as simple as you just haven't eaten lunch. A lot of people talk about being what they refer to as hangry. That can impact your executive functioning skills. So I think this presentation hopefully is a little bit of an eye opener for some of us around, oh yeah, I do that, or here's my strengths and weaknesses in these different areas. I hope you can take some information for yourselves and for your loved ones, but also think about more specifically, how do we identify these lagging skills in our kids and how we're trying to support them considering what they've went through. So when you're looking at executive skills, we'll talk more about what they are specifically, but generally speaking, when you have some lagging skills in this area, then the big two inhibitions, or the big two lagging skills buckets, are inhibition and attention, which is to say that there's difficulty looking into the future to predict consequences in the here and now. So if you think about it in a sense, there's an inhibitory issue where it's impulsivity, right? It's kind of like, oh, I want that now, or oh, I didn't think about that before I threw the snowball across the playground, or whatever it may be. And as you can imagine, it's developmentally appropriate. My kids are 5 and 3, so being impulsive is just part of being 5 and 3. And as we get older, we are, well, theoretically supposed to be becoming less impulsive. But if you have lagging skills in that area, then things are going to happen that you notice that kids are impulsive, or they do things over and over and over, and they seem to have a hard time learning from the consequences. And it, almost like Groundhog Day. And the reason for that is because what happens for some kids that have frontal lobe, some frontal lobe issues or lagging frontal lobe skill development, is that then they'll do a behavior before they've had a chance to think about the behavior. And so we keep bringing kids in to have conversations into the office, or, as parents, you have kids conversations with your kids, and it's like they get it, they know what they should do, they understand what they should have done next time. But even though they know that, they go back out and they do the same thing again. That's often an indication that there's some sort of impulsivity or hyperactivity, if you will, issue going on. The other one is attention. So as you can imagine, being inattentive is really a tough one, because if you're not paying attention to yourself, or if you're not paying attention to the world around you, then that can cause some real headaches. If you're not paying attention to yourself, then it does come out like inhibition issues, impulsivity. It's because you're not taking stock of yourself. As I can see my hand here in the corner, it's competing for my attention. And so my frontal lobe naturally, well, it's trying to naturally kind of filter that out as being irrelevant stimuli. I can certainly direct my attention to it and see my hand, or I can just filter it out with my frontal lobe because it's extraneous stimuli. That's tuning inward. The other thing that if you have attention issues, then you're not taking stock of where you're at in time and place in relation to your behavior and how you might be coming off. And so people who have attention issues often are distracted by stimuli in their environment, but they also miss themselves and where they're going, or how they might be feeling. And so they often have, combined with impulsivity issues, they often have self-regulation issues related to emotional regulation and behavioral regulation. So those are the two bigger bucket areas. Behavioral inhibition and attention is often lagging for kids who have lagging executive skills and who might have went through chemotherapy and radiation. All right, oftentimes, and this comes out of the ADHD literature, you guys, and it's a slide I often use when I'm talking about ADHD, but for those kids and for those of us that have lagging executive skills in certain areas, especially when it comes to inattention and impulsivity, those are the two bigger bucket ones. Typically, kids will have better performance when things are novel and fun, as opposed to being kind of boring. And the other thing to really remember for kids who have lagging executive skills is that consequences or feedback has to be immediate. It's called point of performance. It has to be in the moment. far too often what happens is we'll tell kids and that, you know, if you're good this week, you can have a pizza party on Friday, or you're grounding as parents, you're grounded. Well, how long? Until I decide. Those kind of responses aren't really going to be helpful for kids who have lagging executive skills, because what's happening is there's too much time between what's happened that needs to be consequenced and what the reward or what the potential consequence is going to be later. And whenever that gap increases, then what happens is the likelihood of them being able to follow through with what has been said or what the consequence might be is going to be limited, because as we talked about, their ability to project future consequences is a lagging skill in and of itself. So that's why a key concept for all of you is going to be point of performance, which means in the moment, consequence. What is it that I expect your behavior to be? What is the consequence for not living up to that behavioral expectation? Apply that consequence. And then for most of you, it's going to be a hard time to do this. It's hard for all of us as adults often, but it's then let it go. It's been dealt with. It's been consequence. We've been shown that, hey, we're the ones that are kind of in control of this environment. Here's what we told you that we were going to do. We did it. We followed through. We showed you that we're going to follow through. And now we're going to move on. Far too often when kids make mistakes, we tend to bury them and not give them very easy ways out. And that's usually because we ourselves are frustrated or we're tired or whatever it may be. So it's really important when kids have lagging skills, deal with it in the moment, consequence in the moment, and allow them to move on. If not, what happens is we run the risk of really impacting their self-esteem, which is going to have later consequences for how they function later in life. The one on here that I should talk about. Usually there's people. It's not just a recording, or people I can see if it's in person. Better performance with fathers than mothers, or just to say male versus female, or like male energy versus female energy. The reason for that, typically speaking, is that males use less language to solve problems and to communicate, and so they're grunty, right? So it doesn't make them better parents. It's just that they grunt, you know. And I do it too. I catch myself and sometimes laugh about it. Where I'm like, my son's name is JJ, and I'm like, JJ, go upstairs and brush your teeth, you know. And then he comes back downstairs, and I'm like, did you go to the bathroom? No. Go upstairs and go to the bathroom. And so it's short chunks of information that I'm giving. It's not because I'm brilliant. It's not that I'm a good father. It's just because I'm a man and just like gruff and grunty. Whereas women, typically, this is not true of each individual woman, nor is it true of each individual man, but it is true of a group standard. They're more likely that women are using language to manage more of their day. So it looks a little bit more like, you know, with JJ's mom. Okay, JJ, go upstairs and brush your teeth and comb your hair and clean your face and come back downstairs for a snack and bring your laundry, you know. And that's just good because she's managing the whole house. I'm like, oh man, that's not a good idea. I should have thought of all those things, but because she's talking so much about it and giving him so many things to think about, 4 of the 7 things are being forgotten. And then what it does, it sets up families and parents and teachers to be upset, because then it's like, well, did I not tell you? How many times do I have to tell you? You know, you're 5 now. I shouldn't have to tell you all 3 things or whatever it may be. So that's why that's on there as far as better performance with fathers. I'll change the slide after this probably. It's been on there for a while. Compared to mothers, it's not an actual gender thing. It's just how we use language, and there's differences in how we use language. So one of the interventions that you guys want to think about and take from this is limit your language to direct your kids into doing something. So if you want your kid to follow through with something, and again, I don't know the age groups of all the kids that I'm kind of referring to right now, but basically you want to break multi-step task down into single step instructions. And so it would be something like, JJ, you need to go upstairs and brush your teeth and comb your hair. And when you're done that, let me know. The hard part is going to be that the follow-up has to be with the parent, and it has to be with the adults. You have to go up and make sure it's been done, because guess what? If you have lagging executive skills with inattention and inhibition, guess what's happening when you go up the stairs to check on JJ, and it's like he's twirling in the bathroom doing, I don't know what he's doing half the time. And why? Because imagine at 5 with my son, how many opportunities there are to be distracted and to be impulsive all the way up the stairs into the bathroom. I just asked him to do 2 things, but guess what? He happened to find his dinosaur, and then he found his book, and then he found his sister to push, and then all sorts of things. So then I come up the stairs and I'm annoyed because I told you to brush your teeth and to comb your hair. But really what I did is I gave him opportunities to be unsupervised, so he And with his, lagging frontal lobe, he's only 5, had tons of opportunities to get himself into trouble. And now me, his father, I'm like, I told you to do this. Why are you not doing this? And you're not listening. And now our family's in a little bit of conflict or chaos. And it's all because of his a tendency to get distracted and to be impulsive. And at 5, it's not abnormal. But when you're 15 and you have to, be told 17 times to go brush your teeth and comb your hair, then that can be a very frustrating thing for parents. All right, so what is executive functioning? It's a high-level cognitive process required to plan and direct activities. So it's not abstract reasoning. It's not intellectual necessarily. It's not overly philosophical, nor is it problem solving at an abstract level. So executive functioning is the cognitive processes that are the support structures, if you will, to your intellectual ability. So if you can manage your day and manage time and plan and organize and regulate your emotions and things like that, then you'll be able to apply your intellect to all sorts of things. But if you can't manage time, you can't manage planning things and organizing things, if you can't do that, then you're going to have a hard time bringing your actual intellect and your problem solving ability to bear when it comes to school or math class or as adults, your jobs. So what is executive functioning? It's your ability to initiate a task, right? Can you get your paper out and start the outline for a writing assignment? Can you get your laptop open and through your passwords to get your email to figure out what assignment you should be doing for social studies class? Task initiation is actually quite complicated. It doesn't seem complicated to the majority of us, but it in fact is. It requires a lot of organization and structure in your thought process to get to task, okay? Because guess what? There are a million things that kids would rather be doing than following through with homework because, hey, there's my Xbox, there's my PlayStation, there's my buddies at the door, there's a cupcake, whatever it may be. And so there is a lot of opportunity for things to interfere with task initiation. Follow through is another one. So we started the task, but now some kids, some of us, some people have a hard time following through with the task. So they've started the task, but they have a hard time finishing it. This could be for a variety of reasons, but nonetheless, those who have lagging executive functioning skills often struggle to follow through and to complete tasks. Sustained attention is another lagging skill often seen. So this is your ability can you stay on task for 5 minutes if you're young, or 10 minutes, or an hour? This is a hard part for people who have lagging skills in this area. Sustaining your attention on things, especially when they're not novel and they're a little bit more boring and mundane. This is a difficult and frustrating proposition for a lot of people. Attention is not really an issue at all unless it's when we are required to pay attention to things we don't want to. All of us can pay attention to things that we like, whether that's listening to music or kids on the Xbox or listening to a speaker or watching TV or whatever it may be, reading a good book. We can definitely, most of us can pay attention to these things because we like them. Attention, it really becomes important when we have to sustain it, which is to say, if you think about most of us, if we have a flashlight, I don't know if you guys can see me okay here, but if we have a flashlight, we all scan it if you're camping. We just go back and forth with the flashlight. Our attention's kind of like that as well. And that's what happens. Our attention kind of goes back and forth. But in order to really pay attention, you have to slow that flashlight down and hold it in a certain spot while your eyes actually look to see where the light goes and actually scan. Holding that flashlight there, with taken to our attention, is an actual hard task. For most of us, we just want our attention to go wherever we want it to go. But in order to drive or in order to listen to a teacher or whatever it may be, we actually have to slow that down and hold our attention steady. And that can be a very difficult proposition for a lot of people, and certainly with kids with lagging skills there. Performance monitoring is another one. This is another one, a bigger bucket one for everyone to kind of pay attention to. And all of these, you guys, are ones that I want you to pay attention to as bigger bucket executive skills. And within those buckets, we'll talk about some more specific stuff. But if you see that your kid's struggling with task initiation, then note that, because then there's interventions that tag on to task initiation. There are things that you can do to help improve that. Same with follow through. If you notice that your kid's main struggle is with follow through, then note that, because then there are interventions that map onto that particular lagging skill. Same with sustained attention, etc. So performance monitoring is another big one. This is when kids, what this looks like is when kids race and they finish things very quickly and they're the first one's done, but they make careless mistakes, right? Performance monitoring, you'll know, is an issue when you bring a kid back, be like, check question 4 again and slow down. And they'll look at question 4 and say it's a math question or something. And they're like, oh, right, it was a plus sign, not a minus sign. Oops. Performance monitoring is really indicative by kids that make careless mistakes, kids who rush. For writing, notice if your kid is missing the periods at the end of sentences. That's often a performance monitoring issue. They got a period at the end of one sentence, but not for the next 2, but then they have one for the 3rd and the 4th. That's often a performance monitoring issue. Same with, kids that are doing math calculations. They're making calculation errors, not because they did the calculation wrong, it's because they missed the sign. So I've seen lots of kids do, 10 plus 10 is 20, but the actual question was 10 minus 10. And so they got the question wrong. Therefore, the teacher thinks that their math ability isn't that good. But what the teacher inadvertently marked or docked the kid for is a lagging executive skill in the area of performance monitoring. So if you're looking at your kids making careless mistakes, this is an area that is probably a lagging skill for them. Inhibition of impulses. So I talked about this in the first slide. This is where kids just seem impulsive, like the kid that's always holding their hand up and saying, pick me, pick me, pick me, or like pulling on their mom or dad's, jacket or their shirt saying, mom, 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 mom. Those are kids that are completely appropriate at a certain age for sure. But those are kids that struggle with impulse control oftentimes. And so you'll see that by kids who are impulsive are not reading social cues often. Sometimes they'll be a little bit too much. The other piece is you'll know that they're having impulse issues or difficulty inhibiting their impulses if they're constantly told the same thing and reminded the same thing, which is like, can you stop doing that? Or we talked about that, or no, you need to wait. If they seem to be making the same mistake over and over and over, then they're having an issue of impulse control typically. And the last thing is goal-directed persistence. So this is really, this shapes it all up, right? It doesn't matter if you're young and you're just trying to tie your shoes or do up your Velcro shoes. It doesn't matter. And then, or if you're as some of our ages saving for retirement, it doesn't matter. Cognitive resources, executive functioning skills are all designed in order to keep you moving forward, in order to complete the goal that you have, which could be simply getting out of bed in the morning and going to work. It could be making dinner. It could be getting to, a doctor's appointment on time. All of those kinds of saving for retirement, as I said, all of those things are goals, and it requires directed persistence of our time, our energy, and our task initiation, task completion. So that's how it kind of all fits together. All right, so if you think about executive functioning, really, and there's different kind of metaphors for this, but the one I like is really, it's like an air traffic control center. So if you think about the Calgary Tower or the Calgary Airport, you can imagine that there's tons of things going on, and tons of planes and helicopters and all sorts of stuff in the airspace. And so someone has to guide and direct that, and it's the air traffic controller. So the air traffic controller sits there in the tower and starts directing all these airplanes. So for example, the air traffic controller tells one plane it needs to circle, the other plane needs to go dump off some fuel, the other plane needs to land immediately because there's an emergency, planes on the ground need to clear the runway. All of that's a very important thing in order to make sure that all these planes are landing safely. And that's basically what our frontal lobe is, or our central executive is. It is our air traffic control to make sure we need to get our math homework done before we go to hockey. We need to get hockey done before we go to dance. And then we need to get dance done before we can get home and make our lunch and go to bed. That's basically what's happening. And that's what executive functioning is. It's an air traffic control system that just manages all the day-to-day tasks that most of us, especially as you get older, we take it for granted. How do you guys get to where you go on time? You just end up there. But really, if you break it down, it's a complicated process that starts, to go to a doctor's appointment tomorrow, say, that process starts weeks ago. It goes in your calendar, and then you gotta make sure that you're there on time, and you pick your kids up, and you're gonna be late, but you gotta get gas, and you weren't planning on that. So it means you gotta cut out your Starbucks coffee. You gotta make it up because you don't have the extra 10 minutes anymore. All of that stuff is very complicated. And for most of us, we take it for granted, but that's what your executive, your frontal lobe is doing for you. And for most of us, it's doing it quite efficiently without any real issues. But if you have things like frontal lobe impairment or damage, dementia, ADHD, anxiety, depression, lagging skills because of cancer treatments, then that will be more difficult for the frontal lobe to manage all of those tasks. So as you can imagine, what it becomes, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, I think is, for parents and teachers working with kids with lagging executive skills, you want to become their frontal lobe to some degree, their external frontal lobe to some degree, so you can help manage some of the tasks that they're dealing with. Because if kids have lagging skills in this area, then their frustration and their ability to manage frustration really gets depleted. Because as you can imagine, we've all had days that we're really overwhelmed, and not with what you guys are going through in the medical system and the treatment of cancer with your children, but just days before that where there's just too much on your plate. Kids who have lagging skills in this area need help with organization and planning, as well as stress management, because the level of stress that they're under is quite considerable. And us as adults, we sometimes take that for granted because their world seems simple. What do you got to do? Like, get some math homework done and don't pull the dog's tail. But it's a little bit more complicated than that for these kiddos. And so it's really important that we take that perspective so that we can help intervene and take some of the stuff off their plate, or help them manage the stuff on their plate. Because there's lots of times, even I do this. I tell my kids to go upstairs and do this. Well, I forget they're 5 and 3. They need a little more help than go clean upstairs. It's like they don't even know where the vacuum is. So we have to be careful about our expectations when it comes to kids with lagging executive skills. All right, so this slide's just kind of showing the development of the brain. And so executive skills don't fully develop until you're about 25. And that's why I always say males pay high insurance in Alberta anyways until they're 25. The reason for that is because some of us are morons, and we're stunting and we're speeding and we're driving, and we're driving with one finger and eating McDonald's while flipping someone off because they cut us off and all sorts of stuff. Not me, of course, because I'm over 25. And so we pay high insurance because we're more likely to get into accidents. Why? Because we're not thinking clearly, right? So that's kind of why that insurance at 25 lines up with what's going on in our brain development. The reason I keep this slide on here is because it's to show it doesn't matter what age your kids are and where their lagging skills are. Maturation process continues to grow and to develop, and our brains are really neuroplastic, which means it finds other ways around. So if there's some damage to certain parts of our brain, it kind of rewires and goes around so we can have similar kind of function. So just because your kids are having lagging skills in certain areas after cancer treatment, it doesn't mean that's it's all for naught. It means their brains are still developing, which is the beauty of them being kids, that you still get a chance to continue to grow their brains until they're 25, and arguably some researchers saying 30 years of age. So keep that in mind, you guys, that it's the long game, and really what all of our goals are as parents is to raise kids who are functioning members of society. And there are years and years yet that frontal lobe is going to continue to develop, and that's the silver lining in all of this as well. All right, this messy slide, I've been told numerous times to take it out. I refuse to because I love it. But this is just showing one of the most accepted and widely known models of executive functioning. And it just shows you, I can't really see it on my side, but it just kind of shows how it works, where behavioral inhibition's at the top. And that's kind of the overseer of all the other behavioral or executive functioning buckets. So if you cannot delay your gratification or inhibit your impulses, then you're not going to be able to put the rest of these things to use in order to manage your behavior. So I just left that slide there to give you a visual on how it kind of works and how it develops from infancy all the way up into adulthood. But I will talk about it a little bit here. And just the reason I'm doing this, you guys, and I'll try to embed interventions kind of as I go. The reason I talk about this stuff is so that you have a good understanding of what's actually going on in the frontal lobe. And so when you're observing your kid, oh, that's what's going on. They're not just being pests. They're not just doing it to annoy me. They're not just being defiant. This is how it's working in their brain. And so any other presentation that you go to, or books that you read, or things that are more tangible in skill, as far as what should I be doing, you have something to stack it on. I've done this long enough to know, if you present or work with teachers and parents, be like, oh, just do this, it'll help. It doesn't always help. And then what happens is, like, I've tried that, nothing works. Well, it doesn't usually work is because we need a different game plan and understanding what's happening for our kids before we can actually start intervening with tangible kinds of things. You need to know the theory before you can just start applying parts, right? And so that's my belief, and that's why I'll go over this in a little bit more detail. All right. So behavioral inhibition. This is the foundation for all other skills. If you cannot inhibit a proponent response, which is to say, if you cannot see that there's a yellow light and hit your brake after you decide to run the light, you're in trouble. You're going to be getting in a car accident. So the example I use a lot, and usually if I'm talking to men in the audience, we all do this. And for those of you who've heard me speak before, I talk about this a lot. If you're driving your car as adults and all of a sudden you're driving and you're in that weird spot, whether you should go or stop, and the yellow light hits, for a lot of us, our response is to gun it, is to pin it. We're out of here. But for most of us, as we're about to pin it, which is the proponent response, we go, oh, that's too long, and it's dangerous. And so what do? We stop that proponent response and we move over and we hit the brake. Okay. In kids, it would look like, maybe yelling or swearing or going to take the cookie and realizing, oh, I better not, I'm going to get in trouble for that. Or, I'm going to hit my brother, but I better not. Your ability to stop your initial reaction, your initial proponent response is a very, very complicated skill, that of the frontal lobe. And if you're not able to do that, as you can imagine, you're typically in trouble because you've reacted before you've been able to think about it. So in order to think about it and to use your, all your skills and all the things you've learned at school and all the things you learned at home and all the things that make them great children, in order for that to come to fruition, in order for that to be applied, right? And your management, self-regulation, filling each other's buckets and all that, zones of regulation and all that kind of stuff, you have to stop your proponent response to think about whether this is in your best interest or not. If you don't have that ability, or you have a lagging skill in your ability to stop a proponent response, you've already done the behavior before you ever got to think about what the consequences were, and it can cause kids some problems. The other one is stopping an ongoing response. So this is quite evolutionary and biological, really. So this is really how kids get their needs met. They test the environment and they become quite manipulative, as we all do. And that's not a pejorative thing. That's how they get their needs met. Their entire jobs, depending on their age, is to keep pushing and pulling on the environment. That's how they learn which of these behaviors are now going to be skills that are encoded as I get older, as things that I want to be able to do in order to be successful as I get older. So kids, when they play and when they fight and when they argue and when they do all sorts of things, manipulate mom and dad and caregivers, that's what they're designed to do, because they're just little scientists figuring out what the environment can do and what it won't do, and what people will do and what they won't do. Why they do that is so they understand what works, what doesn't work. So as they get older, they have a better chance of being successful and really at a biological level surviving. So if they don't stop an ongoing response, then what they're doing is that for most kids, what they'll do is they'll select a new response. So again, think of kids, and they're all like this at a certain age, but think of kids that are a little bit older now and should have outgrown this age, but they're like, mom, dad, mom, or in class just blurting out. Or think of kids, if those of you are teachers, that just kids have their hands up, they just, like, you're looking right at them and they just won't put their hand down, and they won't realize that the teacher is looking and overlooking them because they want to reinforce the kid just quietly putting their hand up. So kids that have a difficult time in this area, they have a hard time selecting a new strategy, and they're not paying attention to how the strategy they've selected, which is mom, or teacher, it's no longer working. So they need to select something else. Because they don't select something else, they get themselves into trouble because they've been told umpteen dozen times to stop, interrupting conversations or whatever it may be. Interference control is another thing. This is one of the biggest things. Is interference control is all of the stuff in the environment that's competing for our attention. So again, it's kind of distracting. When I keep moving my hand, I see it out of the corner of my eye. And so that's interference control, right? My frontal lobe, for the most part, is tuning out the traffic. I can hear the traffic. I can hear someone in the hallway a little bit, but my frontal lobe is tuning that out. And so it's important for us to understand that if we have things like ADHD or lagging skills because of, again, treatment or cancer treatment, or depending on the age, or we're just having a bad day, then what happens is we have a limited ability to filter some of that white noise out that is extraneous and irrelevant stimuli. So We have to think about our environments in that way. And that's why, like with school and even at home, you have to think about the kids' environment. Are there distractions in this environment that are going to compete with the attention that I need them to put forth for the task that I've asked them to complete? So if you've asked them to do homework, but they're sitting in the middle of the kitchen, mom or dad are making supper, and their brother and sister are playing Xbox 2 feet away, and the dog's jumping around and barking, and you've asked them to do their homework, you're setting them up for failure. So that's where it's really important to scan the environment to say, okay, what is in this environment that is going to compete for my kids' attention, and are they going to be able to manage that? And if the answer is no, then you need to restack the environment. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is nonverbal working memory. This is really holding visual events or visual representation of events in your mind. So this retrospective function and the perspective function, the hindsight and foresight, this is a lagging skill in many kids, and certainly potentially lagging skill in your kids after they've received treatment. Lagging skill in this area absolutely predicts kind of Groundhog Day in behaviors, because what's lagging here is that movie that's playing, or that TV show, if you will, that's playing in their frontal lobes. That's like, ooh, last time I ran across the road without looking, I got, nicked by a bike or whatever it may be. So this time, before I run out in front of the middle of the road, I'm going to stop and I'm going to look both ways. For that to happen, we all, and kids too, they have visual representations of past events that we're like, ooh, and they can project the future consequence. And that's how they make an immediate decision on their behaviors. If you have lagging skills in the area of nonverbal working memory, you will know this because kids will continue to make Groundhog Day mistakes. We just talked about it. How could you have done this again? Well, the reason they've done it again is they've already acted without being able to remember what happened last time in a similar situation. And they're not able to project what might happen in the future because that visual representation they have is a few seconds behind or not there in some cases at all. Okay. The other thing that you'll notice if kids are having lagging skills in this area of working memory is their sense of time. This is a really important thing, especially for younger kids, or regardless, if it's a lagging skill. Sense of time is a huge skill that needs to be developed in kids, because in order to manage your day, in order to manage your homework, in order to manage your chores, for you guys as adults, in order to manage paying your bills and getting somewhere on time, you need to know time and you need to understand time. And you also need to be able to guess and estimate how long something takes. And you will be surprised how terrible most of us, and kids in particular, are at guessing how long something will take. So I'm going to do my homework. It's only take half an hour. They're 6 hours into it and they're pissed off and frustrated because they only allotted half an hour before they wanted to go with their friends. Well, now they're still sitting here trying to do something that's taken them 4 hours, 5 hours, etc. So helping kids, especially younger kids, guess at time. How long do you think this is going to take? It's going to take 5 minutes, Mom. Okay, let's bet. Let's set the timer and see how long it's going to take and make a little bit of a game of it. And it helps them internalize their sense of time. So it's really important to help set timers, help them guess how long something might take, point out how long something took, give them reminders like, okay, it's 5 minutes until this, or in 2 minutes until this. That's where timers and things like that, and giving them like time markers, right? Count them down. In an hour, we're going to leave. Okay, you only got half an hour left. Okay, you got 15 minutes left. Okay, your timer's going to go. That's where that intervention comes into play, and that will help with some of this lagging skills and sense of time. All right. So self-regulation of affect and motivation. This is basically self-regulation of emotional control. So you'll know if your kids are having lagging skills in this area because they will be snapshots and they will be upset a lot of the time. So you'll see lots of maybe anger or really emotional ability or crying or whatever it may be. That's over and above what you would expect given the situation, obviously. And so this is one that's tough because this is where kids, that impulse control comes into play. So a lot of us, you could say, wear your heart on your sleeve, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that. But there's some people that say, even as adults, you're in the boss's office and you say something and let rip and tell them where to go and how to get there, and it's really not in your best interest. That's typically an impulsivity issue or in a behavioral inhibition issue where you've done or said something or had an emotional reaction before you actually were able to use your coping skills, your calming strategies, and to really think, should I really tell my boss this? Maybe not. If you have a little bit of difficulty managing your emotions, then it's already all come up. right? You've already done something before you've actually really been able to think about it. So there are interventions that are designed to help kids develop their emotional and self-regulation. And again, this one's the easy one to know. You'll have a kid whose behaviors and their tempers are over the top. I often show a Halloween candy clip from Jimmy Kimmel, and it's quite a fun one, where it's impulse control, where the parents say, "Oh, I ate all your Halloween candy," and the kids just like melt down and just completely have a meltdown, and that's because they're not able to manage their emotions enough. They're already impulsively reacting to the situation. I mean, if you're a teenager, you'd be like, "What? Why would you do that?" But the little kids are just like full on meltdowns. So that's emotional control, self-regulation. If you can't control your emotions, you can't control and regulate yourself, then as you can imagine, you're having a very bad day, because it's going to have an impact on your social connections. It's going to impact your ability to manage homework, right? If you have a hard time managing your emotions and all of a sudden math is hard, guess what's going flying across the room? The math book. Well, then guess what's hard to complete? Math. Guess what the consequence is? Facing the teacher tomorrow because you haven't got your homework done because you can't regulate your emotions. So it's an important skill for kids to develop and for us to intervene on and help co-regulate them the best that we can, so that they stay in more of a window of tolerance without going kind of out the bottom of the window of tolerance, which is to say they're freezing up and kind of avoiding, or out the top of the window of tolerance is that they appear aggressive and kind of more in a fight response, if you're thinking about fight, flight, and freeze. All right, verbal working memory. Think of verbal memory, working memory, as the adjunct to the visual working memory, the nonverbal working memory. So I talked a little bit about the like the movie, the visual script that kids, all of us hold in our mind, the visual representation of our past, right? The verbal working memory is like the audio that goes with that, or the music that goes with that. And so it's their internal dialogue, essentially. And so this is like I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't pull the dog's tail, or I shouldn't do whatever. This is our internal dialogue that we believe is our own. It's not. It's been internalized by other people, moms and dads and coaches and all sorts of things. We all think we're talking to ourselves. You're not. That's not your voice. It sounds like you, but it's come from other places. If you think about internalization of speech, when kids are young, say a year and a half to 2.5, certainly 3 to 4, 2. It's often third person, right? Somewhere in there is considered normal. Third person. So for my daughter, who's 3, but when she was younger, you'd say to her like, "Andy, don't pull the dog's tail," and she would look and she would say, "Andy, don't pull the dog's tail." Well, as you can imagine, her frontal lobe and the language part of her brain is not developed. It's not there yet, and so she doesn't have the capacity to internalize that speech as her own. So she looks and she uses third person because she's just repeating back other people's voice and other people's language. So of course that starts off with, typically speaking, not always, but traditionally speaking, mom and dad, or dads or moms or whatever it may be, parents, by saying, "Do not do this. Andy, do not do this." And so what happens is she's like, "Andy, do not do this." Over time, they internalize the speech, and then it's, "Oh yeah, I shouldn't pull the dog's tail." And they do it internally, and it sounds like them. It's no longer, "Andy, I shouldn't." It's, "Oh yeah, I shouldn't do that." And that is our internal voice. That is why we let people cross in the crosswalk. "Oh, I should probably stop. Yeah. Ooh, I should probably go get some groceries. Ooh, I probably shouldn't yell at that person who went through the crosswalk when someone's in there." That's our internal dialogue. Okay. Now, if you can imagine, if your internal dialogue is lagging 1 or 2 seconds, and your visual script, your visual movie's lagging 1 or 2 seconds, then what you can imagine is you've already done something before you were able to say, "Ooh, this is not in my best interest." And I can picture a time that this was not in my best interest. And I can picture a time that this didn't work out for me. And I can picture in the future that if I do this, what's going to happen, because it's a similar situation as what happened before. And my mom and dad and my principal are not going to be happy. I shouldn't do this. Well, guess what? You've already done it. And now you're in trouble again. And that's why it's like Groundhog Day. Okay. So in order to help with working memory, although I told you guys all to talk less when it comes to helping kids follow through with tasks, this is an actual area of problem solving that you want to talk more around kids. So you want to talk about the time that you were frustrated on the weekend and you were able to solve a problem and find a solution, and you were really happy about it, even though you were frustrated at one point. But you realize by regulating your emotions and taking deep breaths and sniffing in the rose and blowing out the candle really helps you calm down. That's a really important thing to do with kids because they'll internalize that speech now. They'll internalize that problem solving. So when it comes to you guys solving problems in your own lives as parents, talk more. Describe how you got through that, like on your own or with help. Talk more about how you solve problems, especially with emotional problems of emotional regulation. If you can talk more, it gives more opportunities for them to internalize your speech. Therefore, they have more opportunities to hear themselves, which is really just you, say, oh, I shouldn't do that, or oh, I should calm down. It's just a flat tire, or whatever it may be. So in this area of problem solving and self-regulation, talk more. When it comes to getting them to do a task like brushing their teeth, doing their homework, talk less. Okay? You need them to do something, talk less. If you want them to learn how to solve problems and think about and regulate themselves, talk more. All right, Reconstitution, this is an interesting one as well. So this is really it's the fluidity in which they can solve problems. So all of us on any given day, we suck at this, right? If you just want to go home and eat dinner and something pops up and now you're stuck at the office a little bit longer, a lot of us would be like, "Blah." The reason being is because we can't really see past the moment now. We're stuck in the moment because you just wanted to go home and now you're stuck in the moment because you didn't plan on the elevator being shut down, or you didn't plan on the doors being locked, or whatever it may be, and you can kind of get frustrated. If you could think about it clearly, you'd be like, oh, that's not a big deal. I'll just order some pizza in and I'll just eat at the front door and I'll, go down. I don't know, that doesn't work my elevator analogy, but regardless, you can figure it out, and there's a backup plan and a backup to the backup plan. And once you have that backup plan, all of a sudden, life's not so bad. But if you get stuck on, I wanted to go home and the elevator doesn't work, and you can't think anything else, then you are going to be quite frustrated. And that's where you're going to see the big behaviors and explosive behaviors come up, especially with kids who struggle with emotional regulation, like we talked about. However, if you're able to have fluidity in which you problem solve, oh, the elevator's stuck, that's not a big deal. I can still get out because I know that there's a bungee cord out the window. Then I can go down and I can still get home and have my pizza, right? It's been a long day, you guys. So the fluidity in which you can problem solve helps with emotional regulation. It helps you problem solve things. It helps you come up with other strategies that you may be able to use. So reconstitution, you'll know that this is a lagging skill as far as a bigger bucket for kids who are rigid, who have a hard time switching gears, who have a hard time. If you told them that you were going to go, I don't know, to an indoor play place on Saturday, and then you are driving there and then you just happen to take a left turn because you wanted to go to co-op and buy some milk or something, and that wasn't in the script, that wasn't in the plan for the kid, you'll know that they have an issue with reconstitution because they'll have a big problem with that, right? They'll have a meltdown. You said we were going to go to, the whatever indoor play place. And, well, we are, honey, we're going to go there, but why want to go now? You didn't say we're going to stop. These are kids that are struggling with reconstitution, which is to say often they are rigid in their thinking. They're not very flexible in their thinking. Some of you might have heard, especially at younger age, like schools and counselors will use this, super flex versus rock brain, some of that stuff. They're actually working at reconstitution skills. So in order to help with this, oftentimes it's giving kids some choice, giving them a little bit of heads up on what the plan might be. That can be helpful. The other thing is when I talked about talking more, this is the other area that can be helpful where you're like, hey, you know what? I was thinking if we do A, B, C, and D, what happens if, E and F happen? But if that happens, maybe we could do this, and just helping them identify other problem solving strategies that might be useful for them, especially if you see that something's going to be an issue, like Saturday going to a hockey game, but you've got to make a stop first. You want to almost preempt it by saying, hey, you know what would happen if I made a stop and, something, unexpected came up? Help that kid problem solve through that before it ever happens, because, in 2 hours, it is going to happen because you know it. And so it's setting them up a little bit to have an opportunity to solve the problem, to think about the problem before they ever actually meet the problem in 2 hours from, when you leave the house. So this is rigid thinking is basically what it is. If you have a lagging skill here, you have rigid thinking and you have a hard time moving past what the initial goal was. It's aching to say they don't have a backup plan because they can't see the backup plan because they get tunnel focused on what should have happened and what could have happened and what didn't happen. Okay, so so if you can see here, I just keep this slide in here, you guys, and we'll talk a little bit of a crisis cycle, because I just think it's important that you learn what lagging skills are and then you learn how to observe for them so that you can decide where your kid lagging skills are. Because if kids have lagging skills in certain executive areas and you intervene on one area when really that is not their lagging skill, then it's going to lead to frustration for the kid and for you guys. And so understanding what executive skills are is the first step, how they work, and then it's going to be allow you guys to be good detectives about where your kids' strengths are and where their lagging skills are. Because just because they're good at or poor at planning, it actually doesn't mean they're poor at organization. And just because they're poor at organization does not mean they're poor at time management. And so if we're helping them manage time when they're actually good at that, but they need help with task initiation, it's setting you guys up for frustration. All right, so here's your actual executive skills. This varies slightly when it comes to the literature, but the only variation would be, I don't know, maybe they say metacognition is not, maybe task initiation and task completion go together. So maybe there's only 9 executive skills. It's splitting hairs. For the majority of your purposes, these are your executive skills that we're talking about. So up until now, I gave you the bigger bucket ones. I gave you the clinical kind of understanding of what's going on in the brain, the bigger bucket clinical information. These now that you can see on my screen or your screen, I suppose, are the tangible actual skills. Okay. I talked about what executive functioning is. These are now the executive functioning skills. So as you can see, inhibition, you need to learn what inhibition is, how you can identify it, and then what are the interventions. And I have a lot of resources in the back of this presentation that Sherry, you can give to people if they want to copy these slides. And it has a lot of books like Peg Dawson, Russell Barkley, people like that. They have really good books on if your kid struggles with behavioral inhibition, here's what you can do. Working memory, same thing. This is an executive skill. So think about working memory as multi-step instruction issues. I told them 5 things. They forgot 7 things. How that happens, I don't know. That's a working memory issue. So if kids have, excuse me, if kids have working memory issues, then it's a matter of how are you going to help them manage tasks. Multi-step tasks are where you're going to see working memory issues, right? You're also going to see working memory issues in things like math problem solving, math calculations. Oftentimes you can see it in reading, right? Because you have to decode the word while remember what you're reading, while comprehending what you're reading. That's working memory. Math problem solving, you got to read the math problem, think about the calculation, hold the calculation in your mind, and then try to remember what the hell you were talking about in the first place. That's working memory. But for the majority of what you guys will see is kids who are struggling with multi-step instructions. That's where you really want to focus and really break the instructions down into manageable chunks, and then monitor them completing these chunks and then giving them positive feedback for completion. As you can imagine, I'll just use my kid as an example. He's 5. So if I gave him 10 things to do and he messed them all up, and I came up the stairs and said, what the heck? How did you mess these all up? You're 5. You should know better by now. You can imagine what that'll do to his self-esteem. If I went upstairs and I gave him 2 things and he nailed them both, and I had the opportunity to say, wicked, man, boom, done 2 things. That's amazing. You can imagine what that would do for his self-esteem. So really the name of the game for any kid in my mind, and anyone who has lagging executive functioning skills, and certainly for the kids that we're talking about today, the biggest intervention that you can do is all designed around their self-esteem. That's the name of the game. So with working memory, you want to design the environment to which you can give them positive feedback for them completing tasks rather than negative feedback for why they didn't complete the task. If you have to always give kids trouble or consequence because they're not living up to expectations as far as getting stuff done, then it's your expectations that are actually too high, and that needs to come down. And so you need to be able to catch these kids doing things well, which means you need to set them up for success so you can catch them doing things well. All right, emotional control. I talked about that one, just so I'm not going to belabor that one. Emotional control, again, is all about self-regulation of affect. So what are interventions around that? Oftentimes, emotional control can be related to anxiety, right? Or that reconstitution. So emotional control interventions are things like helping kids, even meditate. Like there are some very good child meditation apps out right now where, again, my son, is teaching me to breathe and sniff the rose, smell the rose, and blow out the candle. Believe it or not, this is a very effective tool for kids, depending on their age, and it doesn't matter on the age. Just get the appropriate meditation apps for kids. That helps with emotional control quite a bit. The other thing that happens, or that's helpful for kids with emotional control issues is exercise, getting them outside, getting them moving, getting their central nervous systems kind of up and going. That's quite helpful as well. The other thing for emotional control, this is a big one, especially for kids that are like oppositional or a little bit more defiant. You want to be able to give them two, if not three, but two choices, right? So if they're having issues around doing chores, then what you want to do is, in order to keep them in the frontal lobe, is you kind of say, okay, listen, I don't care what you do, but you either need to, take out the garbage, or you need to clean the kitchen. Well, instead of, if you just told them you need to take out the garbage, it's like, no, I don't want to do that. I'm not doing that. But if you tell them, I want you to either take out the garbage or clean the kitchen, they automatically, typically, but they'll have a stronger propensity to be like, kitchen? I don't want to do the kitchen. The kitchen's a mess. That sucks. Fine, I'll take out the garbage. And what you've now done is got them to do a chore, because you've given them one of two options, and one of which is they don't want to do, and one of which is not so bad. So now they're spending time in deferring between the two rather than just outright refusing to do one. So it's a bit of a trick, but it typically works more of the times than it doesn't. Sustained attention is, again, you'll know this because it's like squirrel, squirrel, squirrel. So this is when kids are sustaining their attention, you want to give them a break. You don't want to run them right out of issue, right? So if they're on task and you notice that they're on task and they're doing a good job, that's when you want to stop them and give them a break and then bring them back. The other thing you can do, and it's not wrong to do, it's almost as effective, is when you see them starting to lose their attention, then quickly give them a break. If it goes too long and that they can't sustain their attention, or you notice that they're distracted, it's harder to bring them back into the moment. So that's why you want to, if you know they can only sustain their attention for 10 minutes, then give them a break at 7 minutes, okay? Because it keeps them feeling good and on and successful. So a lot of us believe that when they're like on task, great, off task, break. No, it's not really like that. It's on task, great. They're about to get distracted. That's when you give them the break. And then what you do, what's helpful, is bring them back to the same task, right? A lot of times, especially in schools, and it depends on the kid. You guys, this is not a rule of thumb, but typically speaking, in order to build kids' attention, ability to sustain attention, and frustration tolerance, is that if you give them a break, you want them to come back to the same task. Then they can do a little bit more, and then their next break can be switching tasks. But you don't typically want to give them a break and then come back to a new task. You want them to come back to the same task, okay? Task initiation. This is often about helping kids talk through how to start a task. So if you see kids, if you tell them go upstairs and do this, or start your homework, or whatever it may be, and they're just sitting there not knowing what to do, this is when you need to step in and help them talk through the steps to start the task. Because it's harder than you guys think to realize, like, how do you start an essay? You need to know where your book is, you need to know where your pencil is, you need to know where to start, you need to know what the title of it is, you need to know what the date is, you need to know how to spell your name, all sorts of things. Well, any one of those things can send you off into for interference control. Oh, where's my book? Oh, I know where my book is. It's over. No, I actually don't know where my book is. I think I forgot my book. I don't even want to do an essay. Essay's stupid. I hate school. Well, that's what's going on in their head while they're just sitting there spinning in a chair. So task initiation, you'll know because they're just sitting there doing nothing. But what's inside their brain is that they're having a hard time landing the airplanes, because as soon as they want to land the airplane and go find their book, they're like, oh, I think I forgot it at school, and that airplane's gone. You know what I could do? I could probably go steal my sister's book. Oh, she's going to kill me, and that airplane's gone. And so they're sitting there stuck and going in a cycle repetitively like that, and they're just not doing anything. So it's important for, if your kid's lagging in task initiation, to intervene and help them talk through what they need to do. And then again, monitor their multi-step task by saying, okay, yeah, just go get your book and come back. Okay, I got it. All right, now get your assignment rubric and come back. Help them clear out the clutter so that they can land the airplanes is a very good intervention for task initiation. I'm just gonna check the time here, guys. So planning and prioritization. This is another one. And organization. This is one that's typically lagging for most people who have lagging executive skills. So for you guys observing your kids and trying to figure out which one of these areas of the executive skills are strengths and which ones are weaknesses, typically speaking, planning and prioritization and organization are the three that are typically weak for most kids. And so planning and prioritization is more around how you're going to get something done. Okay, what are you going to do? Planning and prioritization is, what are the tools that I need? What tasks do I need to do in order to get this done? That is a very complicated proposition. Organization then is where is your stuff and how accessible is it, and how then are you going to apply these things? I think all three of them go together. This one's pretty easy to intervene on for those of you who are yourselves organized and able to plan and prioritize. For those of you that are good at this, this is an easy one. Just sit them down and help them work through it. For those of us who are not good at this, it's like, I don't know how to help you organize because I'm not organized myself. So for kids that are disorganized and have a hard time planning and prioritizing, it's important to work with an adult or a teacher or whoever who are really good at this, because then the frustration of kids who struggle in these areas comes down, because a lot of the frustration that comes for any of us is because we just can't fathom how to figure out our day. For those of you that wake up in the morning and you're a bit irritable in the morning until you have your coffee, like lots of people, the reason is, or people that drink coffee in the morning, part of that is because you wake up and you're like, I can't handle today. There's too much on my plate. Give me my coffee. And then once you start waking up, you realize, oh, okay, I'll do this first. I'll make this phone call. I'll do this email. I'll get these groceries. I'll take this kid here. I'll take that kid there. Once you're able to see it and think about it and plan it, it's less stressful. But when you first wake up or whatever, for some of us, and it just seems overwhelming because there's too much to do, it's because your frontal lobe in the morning isn't on yet. It's not awoke yet. And so really all those airplanes that are coming in about an hour, they'll seem manageable because you're awake and your frontal lobe's awake. But in the meantime, as you first wake up, it just seems overwhelming. And so helping kids filter out some of that stuff will be very, very important. And that's just a matter of making lists and making priority lists and giving them the bigger picture, but little steps within that bigger picture. That's a good way to help alleviate their frustration when it comes to planning, prioritization, and organization. Time blindness is one. This comes out of the ADHD literature. Think of time blindness in a couple of different ways. Time blindness is difficulty managing time and guessing and estimating time, right? I thought it was going to take 20 minutes. It took all day. That's one piece. So help kids manage time by guessing time, letting them know time. Hey, that only took us an hour to drive. Not bad. Hey, how long is it going to take you to clean the bathroom, do you think? All day, Mom. Oh, it only took you 20 minutes, things like that. Guess, when kids are younger, like, hey, how long do you think it's going to take to eat your cereal? 700 million minutes, Dad. Oh, it only took you 5 minutes. Helping kids guess is going to be, or estimate time is going to be very helpful in the long run. The other thing, and this relates back to both nonverbal and verbal working memory, is that time blindness is the difficulty, or I'm not going to say inability, but lagging skill in a kid's ability to predict the future. So to go forward in time, as well as to go back in time. So to use backwards function, right? That retrospective function to say, ooh, what happened in the past, to project what might happen in the future, to make an immediate decision. So last time I threw a snowball, oh yeah, I remember that. It hit the car across the road. Oh, I remember that. Oh, and I remember the principal yelling at me, oh, I better not throw this snowball because, oh, right, my parents will ground me from hockey practice. I don't want that. That's hindsight and foresight to make an immediate decision. Kids who have issues with time blindness, you'll know because it's Groundhog Day. They continue to make very similar mistakes, and it'll be something like this. The teachers, principal, or yourselves will be like, how many times do we have to talk about this? As soon as you say that, you have an issue of time blindness. Okay. What else do I want to say? Metacognition. So this is a big one. Metacognition is your thinking about your own thinking. So some people would say it's your mind's eye. It's evaluating your own thoughts. Metacognition is extremely important because it's the difference between just thinking and, oh, I'm hungry. So you open the fridge and you eat. Well, that's not helpful to some of us. So you open the fridge and say, I'm hungry. And then you realize, there's nothing to eat, but your fridge is full. Well, that's weird. I just said I was hungry and now there's nothing to eat. My fridge is full. Wait a minute. There might be something else going on. Right. I'm bored, or I'm procrastinating, or I'm avoiding something. So guess what? I guess I should go take the damn dog for a walk. That's metacognition. And so helping kids think about that, think about, hey, is this thought in your best interest? Is this thought helpful? Is this anxiety talking? Is this self-doubt talking? Do you think there's a different way to think about that? That's how you help develop metacognitive strategies. Because if you can develop metacognitive strategies, then you can actually select what's helpful to the moment, what's helpful to your goals, what's helpful to your emotions. So metacognition is a big one for you guys to kind of familiarize yourself with. Lagging skills with metacognition will just mainly be them not thinking through their thoughts. It'll just be like, this is the way it is. Well, is there a different way to think about it? No. That's when you need to help them develop more metacognitive strategies. Okay. Flexibility is often, just going back up on flexibility. In order to do this, again, you'll know that your child is struggling with flexibility because they'll be very rigid. They'll be hard to move off. They'll have temper tantrums over little things or little changes in their routine, or the environment or the plan. So flexibility, to help them with flexibility, is often give them some options, give them a sense of control, allowing them to tell you kind of like, hey, if this happened, what would make you feel more comfortable, A, B, or C? That's how you build a little bit of flexibility. Okay, the other thing, you guys, I think it's huge, and certainly I believe in systems and having a system around the kid, which includes caregivers and family and schools and all sorts of things. So I have there basically talking about medication. This would be something you have to talk to your doctors about, and there'd be reasons to not be on medication. But for those people who have lagging executive skills, and again, this is medical consultation that you would need, but there is a lot of people's executive skills, inattention and impulsivity and things like that, improve with what's referred to as ADHD medication, but it's really frontal lobe medication that helps the frontal lobe use more dopamine and norepinephrine, and it allows, it holds more of that in the synaptic cleft. And so what happens is, if you think about it, if you can see my hand, can you see my hand okay? Sorry, yeah. So if you think about it like a chemical screen or a chemical filter, I'm oversimplifying, but it's more or less dopamine and norepinephrine. And so if you kind of have holes like this in your filter, then guess what? Squirrel can come in, you're distracted, and oops, I blurted out, or I did something impulsively, because my chemical screen, if you will, which is dopamine, norepinephrine, is a little bit too big, the holes in it. With certain medications, then what happens is it holds dopamine and norepinephrine in the frontal lobe longer. And so instead of a chemical screen like this, it becomes more like this. And so now there's more opportunity to kind of hold something in mind, to think about it before it actually flies out. Same thing, if you have a screen like this, it's able to filter out extraneous stimuli in your environment in order to be able to focus more and not be so distracted. So there are sometimes medical options as far as dopamine and norepinephrine goes, in order to help kids manage their impulses and their inattention symptoms a little bit more effectively. I just did an assessment for a kid, and this is a little bit off, but for a kid who has trauma, who then it looks like ADHD symptoms. Is it ADHD? Yeah, no, who cares? It doesn't matter. But with his symptoms, with trauma, then the medication is actually helping him manage a bunch of these tasks. So it depends on where your kids are in their treatment. It depends on your own beliefs. It depends on what the prognosis is, and it depends on the doctor and what might be in your kid's best interest. But there are some things to talk about with your doctor about what might be helpful to help support lagging executive functioning skills that have been proven highly effective. They're referred to as ADHD pills, but they're not. They're frontal lobe management systems. Parent and teacher education, that's what this is about. And this is just a foundational, baseline, you guys, just throwing some ideas out at you so that it can kind of wet your whistle, if you will, to go seek further information in these areas. Because the better equipped you are at understanding executive skills, identifying lagging executive skills, and knowing where the interventions are to be applied, the easier time you're going to have with your frustrations, as well as the more success that your kids are going to feel, because the whole thing kind of dials down a little bit. Okay, family therapy is a really important one because it helps communicate and problem solve. So I'm a big believer that everyone should be in therapy, although I'm biased to that, obviously. But it just helps have a neutral party say, oh, hang on, did you think about that? Or did you think about this? Because if not, even within our own family systems, mine included, we become echo chambers. We become the forest and the tree. So how do you figure some of this complicated stuff out? It's important, at least sometimes, to kind of check in with a professional and have some conversations, especially if your family gets stuck. If you guys are stuck kind of in a pattern that seems conflictual, then if you can, it's important to reach out to someone to help problem solve some of that stuff. What do I want to say? So I have this in here, you guys, because the crisis that happens in families and schools related to lagging executive skills is palpable, and it is not worth it. We often make a mountain out of a molehill, and I want all of you to realize and remember that kids are doing the best they can, and they would do well if they could. No, there is no kid that wants to be not successful. It just doesn't happen. So I want you to realize that all of us on any given day, at any given moment, we're on our baseline where we feel cool, calm, and collected. But then there's a stimulus or a trigger in our environment, and all of a sudden we start getting worked up. We start getting out of that window of tolerance, like we talked about, or out the bottom of that window of tolerance. And then as we get more excited, what happens in a family system or classroom is, guess what? Mom, dad, caregiver, whoever are getting worked up, kids getting worked up. None of us now can think straight because you're actually coming out of your frontal lobe and you're moving into your limbic system and even into your hindbrain, where you're now in a fight or flight system. Or response or freeze. As parents and as adults, what we typically do is we like parent more and teach faster. We're going to get these kids to realize it, and we start talking more and trying to give them their lesson. But what we don't realize is we're also not actually in our frontal lobe, and it leads to a crisis. And so we start talking more to kids when they're in crisis because we're also in crisis. And what we need to be doing is actually talking far less to kids and giving them time and space. For those of you that are adults listening, as you can imagine, if you get in conflict with your significant other, what do you want? All of us want time and space. Like, just leave me alone. We're done. Like, not done, but give me some time. This isn't working. So once you take some time and some space, cooler heads prevail, and you come back and you can problem solve because you're thinking straight again. Okay. So when kids are getting upset and when you're getting upset, it is important that the adults sniff the rose and blow out the candle, which is to say, calm down, put things in perspective, try to take some time and space, because the crisis that can come over math homework, over forgetting to bring their pencil crayons home, for forgetting that they have to brush their teeth after they comb their hair, these are not worth the crisis in your families, and it's not worth the damage to the relationship. So the most important thing you can do is take a bit of a breather, take a bit of a break, and allow everyone to kind of calm down so that things aren't being said and done that are regrettable. And there are many holes put in walls by kids and by parents, I'm sure too, over math homework, and it's not worth it. All right, I'll finish up by saying this: there are lots of resources at the end of these slides, you guys, and so Sherry, you can send the slides out or copy and paste, do whatever you want. This is yours. The keys to remember, you guys, is this: limit your language. For any kids who have lagging executive skills, limit your language. If you want them to be successful and if you want them to follow through on tasks, you need to limit your language to 2 or 3 tasks, 3 to 5 depending on their age, 1 or 2 depending on their age. You'll know this by, I told them 3 things and they forgot them. Then you need to tell them 2 things. Well, they forgot, then tell them 1. And oftentimes what it is you have to monitor it, okay, until you get an idea of what works and what doesn't. For those of you who've heard me speak before, I go off on this using a soapbox about self-esteem. Okay, the number 1 predictor to how successful people are going to be, if you control for IQ, which the majority of us, believe it or not, are somewhere in here as far as our intellectual ability. Within the average range, which majority of us are, it is your self-esteem and your self-belief that is the predictor of how successful you'll be at school and vocationally and in your careers. So the name of the game for all of you and any teacher that works with kids with lagging executive skills is, how are these interventions designed to improve my kids' self-esteem? That's the question. And so that's why you have to limit the language a little bit and not sweat the small stuff, and be really cognizant of that conflict. Because if kids get through high school and they don't have self-esteem, you will have a problem. Lack of self-esteem leads to shutting down. It leads to kids looking lazy and unmotivated. But really what it is they're afraid to take a risk. Because every time they take a risk, which could be writing, doing math, handing something in, asking a boy or girl out on a date, trying out for basketball, getting a learner's license, driver's license, applying to a job, these are all risks. They're risks of ego, putting our ego on the line to potentially be judged. And so what happens if you have lagging executive skills, you're kind of told quite a bit that, hey, you're not measuring up. You're running too fast when you should be walking. You're walking when you should be running. You're this or that. You're forgetting your homework all the time. How many times do I have to tell you to brush your teeth? All of those kinds of things lead to a kid saying, well, what's the point? No matter what I do, it's not going to be helpful. And I keep trying hard and I'm not getting this level of success that I wish. So you know what? It's not worth it. And so what happens is kids start to shut down, and it looks like, and I've heard a million times, well, they're just lazy and unmotivated. They're not. They've shut down to protect their egos because they become afraid of taking a risk, because every time they do, they're told that they're not measuring up. And so now you see kids like grade 7, 8, 9, high school, whatever, looking just unmotivated and not engaged. That's a self-esteem issue. So for those of you that are teachers here, your interventions need to be designed in pairs too, catching them doing things well, minimizing to some degree the things that are irritating, that they're not doing well, that really first world problems. You know, I say this a lot, like I forget my pen, pencil in meetings all the time. And guess what? When I was at the school board, someone would be like, oh, here you go, here's a pencil. But when they're kids, we have to make a point over the pencil. And then if they keep forgetting their pencils, they're going to be heroin addicts down the road. And that's just not true. Okay. So we have to be careful on the messages that we're going to give kids, that as adults, if I forgot my pen, someone would just hand me a pen. But as kids, we got to make this whole big point about how forgetting pens is really going to lead to them having, you know, negative experiences, jobs, and they really better learn that, you know, forgetting things is a very terrible thing, and blah, 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 blah. We get pretty dramatic with it. So please be careful in the points that you want to make to some kids when they have lagging executive skills. Sometimes just give them a pen, give them a pencil, sometimes just give them a new piece of paper, and sometimes just overlook some of the stuff that can be frustrating and irritating because it's not worth what it'll cost their self-esteem. Okay, the other thing is, this is on here from ADHD, but it applies here for sure. I already talked about time blindness, but the 30% rule. So we'll just borrow that from ADHD literature. The 30% rule is to say kids who have lagging executive functioning skills, this is not going to be true for all of your kids, but a rule of thumb is that they function cognitively, not intellectually, but cognitively. So planning and prioritization and time management and working memory, task initiation, task completion, all of those kinds of things, which are not intellectual, they are cognitive. They could function around 30% of their actual chronological age. Now, this is out of ADHD literature, so it doesn't necessarily apply. But what I do want you to take from it, and what it does apply, is that your interventions have to be functionally based, not chronologically based. So where are they actually functioning? If they're functioning that of a 10-year-old as far as their ability to manage their time, then your interventions and your expectations need to be that of a 10-year-old, not in chronological, but in adaptive and functional functionality. So I hope that makes sense. Okay, so that's one of the things that'll get lots of you into trouble, is they look 10 or they look 15 or they've got a beard and they, you know, all sorts of things. That's fine, but that's setting you guys up for frustration, because, you know, they drive a car, they should know better. They're young adults and they're 16 now and they look like grown men. But really, when it comes to some of this stuff, they're functioning down at a 12-year-old level when it comes to planning and prioritization. So the 30% rule in your guys' case, I just want you to use it as a rule of thumb to say, okay, what is their chronological age and what is their functioning age in certain areas? And that'll help you to actually adjust your expectations more appropriately for where your kids are at. The other thing I'll say is surrogate or external frontal lobe. I alluded to this, I think, earlier. This is where you can see that there's going to be problems, or you can see that they're going to have a hard time landing all these airplanes. Become their external frontal lobe for them. Hey, Johnny Jr., I just want to let you know, A, B, C, and D is coming, or we got a big day tomorrow, so let's start planning this, or whatever it may be. Or, for those of you who have young kids, I have young kids, I see that I've left a knife on the table. Guess what I'm doing? Whoop, and I just take the knife and I move it before I ever have to, do anything else about it. So stack the deck the best you can, the environment to to keep themselves out of trouble, for them not to touch the hot proverbial stove, to make sure that they're looking across the road, because you're about to see the soccer ball get kicked and it's going to end up on the road. Then you need to make sure you're already barking at the kids to say, hey, stop, walk across the road, whatever it may be. Be a little bit of a step ahead of some of these kids and become their external frontal lobes, and it'll keep them out of trouble a little bit, and then allow them to feel a little bit more success. And therefore you guys are able to catch them doing things well and give them more feedback. Okay. The last thing, and that's the environmental intervention part. The last thing I'll say is point of performance. Catch them doing things well. Okay. Minimize to some degree the things that they're not doing so well. And if you have to consequence them, it's in the moment, right? You tell them what the behavioral expectation is. You tell them what the consequence is if they don't live up to that expectation, and then you do it. But this idea of, grounding a kid on Monday for the week, it's not working. It's just going to set you guys up to be frustrated. This idea that you're grounded for a month, this idea that you're grounded till I say, or even for teachers, if you're good all week, you can have a pizza party. You are setting these kids up for failure. So you want to be careful with that. You want to point a performance, which is, this is what happened. Here's how we're dealing with it, and let these kids move on, because they're going to continue to get dinged. If they have lagging skills, they're going to continue to have their self-esteem dinged more times than not. So we don't always have to be trying to break their back, so to speak. Okay. For most of us, this study's been, and I'll just finish off by saying this. This study, it was Bender did it originally, and it's been replicated numerous times, which is about 85% of our day, 85% of our day is negative, some sort of negative feedback. When we interact, it's something about something we don't like. Shouldn't have done this, you shouldn't have done that, whatever it may be. If you have lagging executive functioning skills, and it doesn't matter which ones, if you have lagging skills, then you can predict that they're coming home from school or their environments or whatever it may be, and their interactions with people are typically, as far as corrections, it's about 95% of their days being told what they're not doing properly. Okay. And as you can imagine, what does that do for self-esteem? So the reason I tell you that, you guys, is as parents, you have to be able to counterbalance that by catching your kids doing things well and minimizing things that they're not doing that well. If it's not a safety thing, or if it's not dire, you can let some of that go. And what my analogy is with teachers oftentimes is, yeah, you might have caught them running down the hallway 10 out of 10 times, but don't say anything. But that one time out of 10 that they're walking, catch them walking and tell them that they're walking and tell them that you're proud of them. And that's really your biggest intervention in all of this. The other things that I've talked about, the things that you're going to read about or listen about, all the tangible interventions that you all want, those are beautiful. They are, and they'll be helpful, but they're only opportunities for you to engage your kids in a different way, which allows you to engage them in a very strength-based way that catches them doing things well and giving them a belief system that they are successful and that they're going to be fine. And that's the biggest name of the game for all of you. Thank you very much. And Sherry, I don't know how you.
Well, I would like to just extend a thank you to you. I really appreciate your explanation about executive functioning and the strategies that you've shared. I think that they'll be very, very helpful and appreciated by our families as well. Thank you so much to get to go back over this and listen and learn from your experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much.